Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, Theresa May has always insisted she'll put duty before ambition. And tonight she offered to make the ultimate sacrifice in a statement to her MPs just a short while ago in Committee Room 14 upstairs. She was, she said, prepared to leave her job earlier than she'd intended in the national and party interest. It is a high-stakes gamble, and with the DUP keeping their counsel tonight, it's uncertain if it will pay off. In the meantime, MPs are, as we speak, voting on a Plan B to the Prime Minister's agreement, from staying in the customs union to cancelling Brexit altogether. Well, to chart a path through the chaos as ever, our political editor Gary Gibbon is with me. What now?
Theresa May was making this statement in a very, very crowded, sweaty room. I think some of these MPs weren't really going to believe she was going unless they heard it in the room from her own lips. Her friends, of course, are saying this was an extraordinary, selfless act, her putting the nation before her own future. It also has a whiff, I have to say, of one of those sort of delicate sequencing, choreographed moments that you get in a peace process. Maybe that's not an entire accident. You had the Sunday meeting with the Brexit rebels, Jacob Rees-Mogg sort of showing a bit of ankle, and then a bit more ankle about him converting, Boris Johnson doing the same, and now the Prime Minister. The other bit of that sequence that should happen, if she's to be really within touching distance of guaranteed victory on the meaningful vote, is the DUP. And as you said, at the moment, they are not showing signs of having converted. There is enormous pressure going on tonight onto the remaining ERG Brexit rebels. Some people saying those numbers are being squeezed down to the low 20s, some saying it's being squeezed even lower than that. But even if you get to those numbers, she would need something like 20-something Labour MPs to help her out on the night. And if you're a Labour MP right now, contemplating a fairly imminent Tory leadership contest, perhaps, who knows, Boris Johnson as the next Prime Minister and Tory leader, that might just make you think twice about supporting the meaningful vote. Theresa May is hoping that the other threats that are around, like the process that's going on here, the constitutional innovation of indicative votes, that might weigh on people's minds. But she had another great boulder put in the way of progress today, potentially, and that was the Speaker saying, actually, you might not have the meaningful vote when you want it. It looks at the moment as though she wants it on Friday. The Chief Whip said in that sweaty room a few minutes ago, we will use every weapon at our disposal to repel the Speaker's judgment. We'll see how that goes. But on a day of constitutional innovation, you have to say at least one tradition has been observed. Europe, the European Union, is eating up and spitting out Conservative leaders, just like it does.
Theresa May this afternoon promised Tory MPs she'd go after Brexit was delivered, not try to lead Britain into the talks over the future relationship with the EU. It was the price Tory pro-Brexit rebels extracted from her for coming to support her deal.
It was a great relief that she said what she said, because I think there'd been a lot of frustration building up in the parliamentary party.
But it came in a day when the Speaker seemed to be frustrating her chances of testing her deal again, and as Parliament began full-scale constitutional works. MPs trying to wrest control of Brexit policy off the government debated ahead of a balloted vote later on options that include no deal, Common Market 2.0, staying in the single market without the customs union, or just the customs union. Labour's variation on that, revoking Article 50, a second referendum. The Prime Minister was pressed whether she would accept the Commons verdict.
If today or on Monday a consensus alternative plan emerges across the House, will the Prime Minister accept that decision of the House and accept it as the basis for the UK's negotiating position with the EU henceforward?
Prime Minister!
Well, gentlemen, the objective that we should all have is being able to guarantee, the objective we should all have is being able to deliver Brexit and guarantee delivering Brexit to the British people.
The government actually tried to stop today's voting and told cabinet ministers they couldn't take part. It's hoping this new approach crashes on its test flight.
Members may not vote aye and no to the same motion. If they're in the cabinet.
What if they're in the cabinet? One MP shouted. This new phenomenon of Parliament asserting its power over the government required MPs to compromise, they were told. Ken Clarke said his own amendment, supporting membership of the Customs Union, was actually his third favourite option on the ballot paper tonight.
I shall vote for several. I think we should all vote for as many of these proposals, these motions, as we can. And then we'll see which is the strongest, but we will not be dismissed by the more fervent members of the government saying, well, they've all been defeated.
Each of us today is a leader. The Prime Minister has one vote. The Leader of the Opposition has one vote. So does every other honourable and right honourable member. In years to come, the question that our children and grandchildren will ask us is this. In that historic week when Parliament took charge of the nation's destiny, what did you do? Did you stand up and lead? Did you step forward to help reunite our country? Or did you hang back in your party trench, waiting to be told what to do and where to go?
The government is hoping that all this fervour could unnerve Tory pro-Brexit rebels. The idea of Parliament asserting itself, brainchild of former Tory Minister Oliver Letwin, could help deliver Mrs May's deal at the third attempt.
I think Oliver Letwin has played an absolute blinder. Basically what he's done is he's shown our friends and colleagues in the ERG the instruments of medieval torture. They're all laid out in his motion. You've got the sort of single market, which is the branding iron. You've got the rack, which is the Customs Union. And you've got the red-hot poker, which is the withdrawal of Article 50. And I think it's going to concentrate minds and makes it much more likely that Mrs May will get her deal on the third time of asking.
There is a movement that Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson's doing a bit of signalling as well, other MPs, they are coming on board with the Prime Minister. What do you think is the actual size of the hard core that won't?
All of those colleagues who are saying they are willing to look at it, as I am, nobody will move if the DUP feel that they're being annexed. So that just won't happen. None of those colleagues will.
But if the DUP moves?
I think for many colleagues that will be enough, because our concern is to keep our union together.
What's the size of the hardcore that doesn't move just with the DUP?
That's an interesting question.
Some people say it's 24, some people say it's a bit less, some people say it's 15.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, we haven't tested it.
But it's somewhere in that range.
Yes, I think it is. I think, which means it's quite difficult to see her getting across the line without a lot of Labour support as well.
But any Labour MPs contemplating supporting the Prime Minister's deal may be put off if they think the Tories could elect, say, Boris Johnson in Theresa May's place as soon as this summer. He was seen leaving the meeting of Tory MPs with a very wide smile on his face, having been amongst those spelling out at Chequers to the Prime Minister at the weekend how a change of leadership might just make it possible for a change of mind on the meaningful vote. One Tory said the logic was alarming.
If genuinely they think that the solution is to sign up, leave, and then try to take the whole thing to pieces, I think we can guarantee, firstly, we're going to have a very long period of immense and sterile debate. And certainly, I think when it comes to that, I can confidently predict my party will split.
Challenges for a leadership contest that could dominate the early summer if Theresa May gets her deal through. There were more converts to the deal declared straight after she spoke to Tory MPs, but many more are still needed.
Well, with me now is the Community Secretary and ally of Theresa May, James Brokenshire. She sacrificed herself. Is it enough to secure the deal, in your view?
Obviously, the Prime Minister has made her decision tonight on saying that she would not follow through on phase 2 of the deal, which is our long-term relationship. But ultimately, it's about getting through phase 1. And I think that's what we've seen from Theresa May, is that sense of what's in the national interest, that sense of public service almost, which has been at her credo, and saying, look, this is a moment in our history. Today in this place, in the Commons, we're seeing effectively the Commons taking over on taking control of the business of this place, changing that constitutional relationship. And therefore what we have at stake, and wanting to ensure that she is doing all that she can to see that we pass that vote. So yes, I think there is clearly movement.
Okay, but is there movement from the DUP, because they're staying ominously silent tonight, aren't they?
Well, I think against the backdrop of everything else that has been taking place, with all of the votes that are literally being cast behind me in the House of Commons chamber at this point, and equally with the 1922 committee that focus on the Conservative Party, I think it's understandable that the DUP have not said anything today. But clearly
do you think they'll come on board?
Well, I think, all I can say is that discussions are continuing. There are hard choices that colleagues in my own party have to make, and indeed that we all have to make as MPs, in terms of getting behind, as I would see, this deal, because that is what delivers certainty, that's what delivers Brexit.
More money being offered to the DUP, is that what they're holding out for?
I think it's more the fact, the constitutional issues on our precious union, which matters to me profoundly as someone who believes in the union, and indeed as a former Northern Ireland secretary as well, that special place that Northern Ireland has within our United Kingdom. So I know the DUP will be looking at this, thinking about this carefully. With some of the private conversations that I've had around this place with them, I know that they are thinking and reflecting very, very hard.
Isn't it reality that even if Theresa May doesn't get her deal, she's still going to be off?
I think the point that we have is that at this time, you can speculate about what if that. The certainty that we have is that if the deal gets passed here, that we can move on. We can deliver on Brexit. We can see this country leaving the European Union, leaving in that managed way. And with all of the uncertainty, all of the things that we have seen here, all of the division that we've seen across the country, that is what is within our grasp to deliver, and why the Prime Minister has said what she's done tonight with that profound sense of civic duty and focus.
For all probability, she won't be in Downing Street by the summer.
No, I don't think, what she has said is that if this deal is passed, she would not see through the second phase. And what she wants to see is our party coming together after phase one, giving that time for reflection, giving that time as well in the country to come together. And so I think it's just ensuring that we look at the here and now, because that has not changed. We can look at what the Prime Minister has said, but ultimately this deal still needs to be landed. We still need to provide that certainty that the country demands.
So you've worked many years with the Prime Minister, 9 years, you've been a close friend of hers. I believe you spoke to her last night. Did you get any sense?
No, it's, Theresa is someone who looks at issues very closely and carefully. That sense of duty. She said tonight that, she would have wanted to stay through to see this through, but knew that others wanted to see that change. And I think for me, that's what I've seen from her over so many, many years, reflecting carefully, looking at the facts, looking at the evidence, and weighing up what she judges is in the best interest of the country, and how tonight she's...
her party, she made that clear in her statement, it's national and party interest.
But in some ways, that is that alignment on how we come together as a party to deliver on what the country have tasked us to do, to deliver on Brexit. And so, she has that sort of real inner sense of duty. As I believe it's that sense of service before self that has guided so much of what she has done, not being scared of taking hard decisions, and indeed seeing what she judges is in the national interest, which is what I think she's done again tonight.
How hard do you think it was for her to make this decision, and also to know how disliked she was by her own party?
I think that inevitably when you make a decision like tonight's, it's incredibly hard. Incredibly hard in weighing up how you feel about this, but equally in a more dispassionate way, making that judgment on what will deliver, what you're there for. And for her, that profoundly is delivering on the referendum results.
So when is the vote going to be? For a third time, it's been twice defeated. When is it coming back?
Well, we obviously want to see the vote coming back when we are confident that we can get that majority there. So obviously
Friday.
there is time that can be made available, but ultimately it's judging that right moment to get the party behind us, to get Parliament behind us, and actually deliver on what we have been tasked to come into this place to do, which is represent our constituents, but equally on that referendum result, get on with it, deliver for the country, deliver on Brexit, so that we can all come together and move on.
Very quickly, can you see Boris Johnson in number 10, someone who talks about the child abuse inquiry, spaffing money up the wall?
now and tonight is not the time to be thinking about who the next leader of the Conservative Party is. I think actually that's slightly self-indulgent when we have these huge issues of our constitution, of our country's place in the world. That's where I think that's where everyone's focus should be tonight, because that's what the Prime Minister's message was. Come together, we can work together, we can make this happen, we can deliver on Brexit, we can deliver on the country. That is what we are now able to do. So let's go on and do it.
Can you work with Boris Johnson, though?
Well, I've worked with Boris Johnson when he served in cabinet alongside me.
But as your boss?
Well, you know, again, tonight is not a night of speculation. I am sure that in due time we'll have plenty of time if we get that vote passed. And ultimately, nothing has changed in that regard. The constitutional issues, the political issues still remain the same. And our razor-like focus must be on passing that vote, delivering on Brexit and making it happen.
James Brokenshire, thanks very much for joining me. Well, arch Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg has declined to say who he'd support as the next Tory leader so far, but he's with me now, so perhaps, Jacob, you'd like to enlighten us on that point. Good evening.
Sorry, unfortunately I didn't hear your question.
Well, I'll ask it again. Are you backing Boris for leader, or will you stand yourself?
I think today actually is a day for praising Theresa May for her public service, for thanking her for what she's done, and the enormous dignity with which she presented herself to the 1922 committee, and was willing to lay down her own personal ambitions and her own job.
So
for the interests of the country and the Conservative Party.
And you do trust her to actually follow through on what she's promised?
The Prime Minister's made her position very clear, and as I understand it, Downing Street has made it very clear as well, that the Prime Minister seeks to get this first stage done, and then will allow someone to take over after May. So yes, of course I trust him to do that.
So now, seeing as she has made this sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, will the ERG en masse come on board and support her deal?
I said this morning that I would support her deal regardless of her position, assuming the DUP is at least neutral, because I've come to the conclusion that the choice we face now is not between no deal and Mrs May's deal, but between Mrs May's deal and not leaving the European Union. And not leaving the European Union would, I think, be the great betrayal of the British people. And we have this terrible clash between the British people and Parliament, where Parliament seems to want to obstruct Brexit. And therefore the best hope is to back her deal. So that's the position I've got to, regardless of her position.
I mean, it really is quite something. I just want to read you a couple of things you said about her deal before. You said her Brexit deal is dreadful. The Brexit we're getting with the withdrawal deal is not a proper Brexit. Nothing is going to be worse than what we've been offered. You said it's not so much the vassal state anymore, it's the slave state. Are you happy to be enslaved now?
I said all of that and I stand by all of that. I don't like the deal at all. But at least we would legally have left the European Union as opposed to remaining in.
You've been outmanoeuvred by the Prime Minister, haven't you? I mean, she's just stubbornly kept on, and you've had to fall into line.
Well, you may put it that way, but the choice we face was going to be between no deal and her deal. Until a few days ago, we were leaving, and the Prime Minister said 100 times from the dispatch box and other places that we were going to leave on the 29th of March. And I made the mistake of believing that that statement was a reliable statement of fact. It turned out not to be.
You've made quite a few mistakes, haven't you? Because, you know, you may have a few million to spare. The country doesn't. And the country has spent billions preparing for no deal because of your intransigence in part. Do you feel any sense of shame over that?
That's simply wrong.
Well, it's not wrong, though, is it?
No deal preparation was nothing to do with what I was saying. That was the prudent position of any government in a negotiation, that you always have to prepare for no deal. And most of the money spent on no deal, such as preparing the M20 in case of stoppages in Calais, is money that needed to be spent anyway in case the French go on strike. So a lot of the preparations are things that needed to be done regardless.
You wouldn't have had to do those preparations if you'd signed on the dotted line, as you're now prepared to do. If you'd done that months ago.
That's not quite right, because these preparations were being put in place a long time before, because part of the negotiating strategy inevitably had to be that we could walk away without agreeing a deal. So that was part of the government strategy from early on. I mean, I think actually they should have made more preparations and made it a more realistic threat. But I would have been quite happy to leave without a deal on the 29th of March. It's the government that changed its mind.
You've said sorry in the daily pages of the Daily Mail this morning. Would you like to apologise to the British people for leading them a merry dance on all this?
No, I still think the deal is a bad deal. It's simply a different choice. What I'm sorry about is that we can't get to leaving without a deal. But unfortunately, the position has changed. And although it says in statute law that we leave on the 29th of March, that has been trumped by EU law. Indeed, it's a reminder of one of the reasons why we want to leave, so that our law doesn't get trumped by foreign bureaucratic law.
Well, so let me just be clear about your position. The ERG tonight is not speaking with one voice. What can you say to them to persuade them to back Theresa May's deal?
The ERG has never spoken with one voice in this way. The ERG is a group of members of Parliament with interests in the European issue. We're not a party within a party, we're not a disciplined organisation, and people have many views which we discussed fully between 6 and 7. So I'm not trying to apply an ERG view, that doesn't exist.
Have you betrayed them, though?
I don't think that's the right way of looking at it. I think I've looked at a new set of circumstances.
Just finally, does it have to be a lever in number 10 next to negotiate the next phase, in your view?
If you invite me on in fairly short order, I will happily discuss the leadership at as much length as you like. But I think today is a day to celebrate what Mrs May has done for her country and her sacrifice, and to thank her for her dutifulness. So I'm not going to be drawn today.
Well, don't go away. If I may just bring in some other guests to join you, that would be absolutely
great.
great.
I must go away because I've got to go and vote in this multi-choice extraordinary constitutional thing.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Well, now I think we have Anna Soubry, we have Jess Phillips, and we have Nicky Morgan here. Obviously, TIG, Labour and Conservative. Let me just grab this mic here now. This is all a bit ad hoc tonight. Nicky Morgan first. Deal or no deal, do you think the Prime Minister's going to get it?
I think there's a good chance. I can't say for certain because I don't know. Obviously, more people are moving across to support the deal. We're waiting to hear from the DUP, and we need to hear, obviously, from some of the Labour MPs who might be inclined to support it but haven't yet said so.
But she was part of the problem here.
I'm afraid she was, and I think the fact that she has confirmed that she will not see go into the phase 2 negotiations will undoubtedly help some Conservative MPs to support the deal.
Can you bring yourself to back Boris Johnson, someone who jokes about child abuse inquiry spaffing money up the wall?
Well, I will not be part of Boris's campaign team. I will not be supporting Boris in the leadership contest, but unfortunately I can't stop him or anyone else from standing.
But will you stand yourself?
Well, it's very nice to be thought of in that way. Got to be honest, I've got plenty of other things I like doing, probably a bit more than being leader of the Conservative Party.
Definitely a non-denial there. Jess Phillips, will you and your Labour colleagues help Theresa May get this deal through in the national interest, get this stuff done and dusted?
I won't, but I can't speak for all of my colleagues. I think Nicky's right. I think that it will probably scrape through on some Labour votes. If they think it could get across the line, I think more would be inclined to vote for it, but I wouldn't be voting for it.
I mean, she's made the ultimate sacrifice here. Isn't it beholden on all of you to shift a little bit now? She's made a big statement tonight.
I couldn't care less about the Prime Minister's statement, and none of this has been about who is the Prime Minister or who is the leader of the Conservative Party. This was meant to be, for the true believers in the Tory party, about the backstop, which suddenly they love the backstop now. And the Tory psychodrama is what started this referendum nonsense, and now that's where we're ending up with it. I feel no sorrow for the Prime Minister today. I don't think she's making an ultimate sacrifice at all.
There was something slightly a sense of pathos about her statement, though, wasn't there? She said she doesn't gossip round bars.
But she's been terrible, and she's now falling on her sword. And actually, I think what I would say to Labour MPs who are considering voting for her deal is that actually, even if we'd kept the Prime Minister for the next stage of Brexit, we might have been able to have something sensible. Replacing her with a hard Brexiteer is going to be an absolute nightmare. So I feel nothing in sorrow for the Prime Minister.
Anna Soubry, you left the Conservative Party
I can't
for
think
the
why.
independent group. Well, do you feel any sense of sorrow for Theresa May tonight?
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid the Prime Minister is the author of her own misfortune. I think it's an exceptionally shabby, appalling piece of behaviour of my former colleagues who are now going to vote apparently for her. It's not a deal, it's this withdrawal agreement, not because they believe in it or they think it's the right thing to do or it's the best thing for our country, but purely and simply to get rid of the Prime Minister. What a shameful piece of appalling behaviour, and it just further proves to me that the two parties are in a shocking state, and the sooner we wake up to that and start to change our politics and do it better.
Well, there's not a stream of MPs joining you in the TIG group at the moment.
Well, hang on a moment. Everybody at the moment is obviously talking about Brexit, or rather they should be, because it's the biggest decision that our country has made. But I can assure you, even this evening, I know what people are saying to me in private, in fact, on both sides of the party, from both parties rather, which is that they are just appalled at the state, not just of both parties, but the state of British politics. I mean, we should all be doing, and I pay tribute to Jess, doing the right thing, which is doing the best thing by our constituents. And I suspect, like Jess, I will not vote for something in the full knowledge it will make my constituents worse off.
So you're definitely not voting for her deal?
Oh, no. And the other thing that needs to be said is that, people like Nikki, who's entitled to change her mind, has tonight presumably voted and in a certain way that is different than the way that she's voted in the past. She's entitled to do that. She can change her mind and change her vote. But my constituents, our constituents, are not entitled to change their minds and to change their votes by way of a people's vote and that second referendum. And I think that's hypocritical, and I think, again, it's shameful that MPs are saying one thing and then denying ordinary people exactly the same privilege that they've enjoyed themselves.
Let's put that back to you then, Nicky Morgan.
Well, I voted today all the options that basically are a negotiated settlement that would lead to, I think, an orderly Brexit. And the trouble with the second referendum, which I have not supported, is the fact that actually what people want the second referendum is to rerun 3 years ago. It's not about, well, Anna, it really is, because it is, because
the deal that we settle on to the British people, now they know everything. You've changed the way you vote. Full credit to you for that. You're entitled to do it. But why can't our constituents vote?
But I haven't changed the way I vote.
You voted in favour of the single market and the customs union. You've never voted.
That was last summer. I voted. Yes, I did. I voted in amendments last summer on it. Thank you very much. The point about a second referendum.
Never voted for the single market.
I voted on the amendments.
I've only got one mic at this point out.
All right, I'm going to intervene and say...
I mean, this is the Tory party as was. But how can Labour... Labour has not covered itself in glory during this whole episode. It's riven from top to bottom. You haven't helped find a solution whatsoever.
No, I mean, I don't disagree, and I actually, some of my colleagues today having to toy with whether they'll resign from their front bench positions. I think that the Labour Party could have been clearer a lot longer ago about what their position on this was, to give cover to people, to send a clear message. I think that the Labour Party wanted to try and be all things to all people, which in some ways is admirable, trying to please everyone, but it doesn't
Jeremy
work.
Corbyn leave for the second phase as well as following Theresa May's lead?
I'm not sure Jeremy Corbyn ever follows Theresa May's lead, to be fair to him.
I think it's unfortunate, actually, that Labour, they softened the whip. They said to people that the advice was to abstain on the Joanna Cherry motion, which is all about
revocation.
Revocation in the event of no deal. In the event of no deal, so that then becomes the backstop default. Sorry, the default position, which I certainly voted for, and I suspect a lot of good Labour, you would have done. And it's a pity that Jeremy Corbyn didn't say, put a 3-line on that, because that's a very good motion. That's really important.
What happens if Theresa May doesn't get her deal? Is she out anyway now? Is that it? Curtains?
Well, I do think that actually if the deal doesn't go through, then the Prime Minister's strategy has failed. And I think actually what that's going to bring it to a head is if we haven't got a majority of something tonight, which is probably unlikely, we'll come back again and do this on Monday. And if the Commons is able to get the majority, the government and the Prime Minister have to think how they're going to respond to that. And I can see it'd be very uncomfortable for the Prime Minister to implement something that she truly doesn't believe in. And that's when most Prime Ministers will say, I can't do this. Maybe somebody else is better placed to do this, and to build really the cross-party consensus that we should have had for the last couple of years, because Brexit's not a party political thing.
We would
all right,
we're all agreed on that, because that's what we
well, what a fantastic way in which to end.
If only women were in charge. You must be one of the 14.
We've had a woman in charge.
No, we're men. All of them. No, there are 14 of us are going to go and see her. We're taking up her challenge. I think you're one of them. You might be one of them.
And you can come and tell us about your leadership bid when you launch it. Ladies, thank you very much. Well, earlier in Strasbourg, the EU's chief negotiator Michel Barnier suggested Britain could stay inside Europe if it wants to, declaring anything is possible until the 11th of April. While the European Council chief Donald Tusk warned the European Parliament not to betray the 6 million Britons who signed the petition calling for Article 50 to be revoked. Our Europe editor Matt Fry is there. Matt.
Well, Cathy, when she eventually actually goes, you'll be very hard-pressed to find anyone here at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, or indeed in Brussels, Paris or Berlin, who will really miss Theresa May. They really didn't like her opening salvo about citizens of nowhere soon after she came to office. They thought that she turned EU citizens in the UK into bargaining chips. And then over time, they lost respect and faith for her ability to marshal the messy process of Brexit. But relief at her departure comes tinged with angst about her possible replacement. For instance, the words Prime Minister Johnson make lips curl here. Meanwhile, British MEPs have been packing their bags, wondering if it's for good. If you have the time and you don't mind the blood-red walls, the corridors of the European Parliament eventually lead you to a site that should have become extinct on Friday night at 11 in room 091 on the 8th floor, where a lone assistant still presides. So you literally have a Union Jack, and that's it?
At half-mast, yeah.
At half-mast?
Because that tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it? Surrender. I was going to put a little white one on top, but...
It's the twilight zone of unfinished goodbyes. In the office next door, Brexit Party MEP David Coburn is clearing out after 5 years here. You're packing up, you're putting all your belongings into boxes.
Yes.
And yet, we're not leaving tomorrow or the day after.
To be the safe side, but
Yeah.
it's a good excuse to tidy the office for the first time in 5 years. So if nothing else, it's a good exercise in that.
But you might be back here as well, if we have another European election.
It's possible. I think it's probable the way things are going.
Yeah.
I got a horrible feeling that if we do get Brexit by accident, it will be a mistake on the part of Mrs. May, who does not want us to leave the European Union, and it will be through the arrogance of the European Union. So between the two of them, they're both doing a pretty horrible job.
No love lost, including this morning in the Chamber. Who would have thought that after almost half a century here, Britain never commanded more attention than on its way out of the door?
You cannot betray the 6 million people who signed the petition to revoke Article 50, the 1 million people who marched for a people's vote, or the increasing majority of people who want to remain in the European Union. They may feel that they are not sufficiently represented by the UK Parliament, but they must feel that they are represented by you in this chamber, because they are Europeans. Thank you.
We're witnessing a slow motion betrayal, perhaps the greatest betrayal of any democratic vote in the history of our nation. And the reason, of course, is this withdrawal treaty. And I'll go back to the First World War. We won the war, but we had the Treaty of Versailles. And this treaty is the modern-day equivalent.
Mr Farage, no one in Brussels is trying to steal Brexit from you. No one is trying to undo the vote put to the British people. But it is not Brussels that decided that the UK would leave the European Union. You were the ones who made that choice. You are the ones who have to take your responsibility and face up to the consequences of that decision. No one else.
In these corridors, they've lost all faith in Theresa May to deliver anything. So all eyes today are on the Commons. Who's in charge in London at the moment?
That's a question that I have to put to you, not you to me.
No, but who do you think's in charge?
I don't know.
You don't know who's in charge? Who would you call in Parliament to find out who's in charge?
The Speaker.
What did you say?
The Speaker!
The Speaker. Do you seriously think this process will lead to something?
Hopefully.
Who's in charge in London at the moment? Who's actually running the show?
I have no idea. Besides, it's not for us to say.
It's Wednesday, and on Friday, Brexit was supposed to happen. The only thing we know is that it won't happen on Friday, because the UK has asked for an extension, and we have granted. That's the fact. All the rest,
you don't know.
How, when, and if Brexit will happen, nobody knows.
Here, this flag will be missed by some, but not by all. And you never know, it may yet linger.
Matt Fry.
Good evening from Westminster, where the Prime Minister has told Conservative MPs that she will leave Downing Street if they finally back her Brexit agreement. Her statement prompted Boris Johnson and others who've been extremely critical of the deal to say they will now come on board. The Prime Minister's deal could be brought back to the Commons by the end of this week. But tonight, Mrs May's parliamentary partners, the Democratic Unionists of Northern Ireland, said that they still could not support the deal. And during the evening, the House of Commons has been exploring its own preferred options on Brexit, but has failed to find a majority on any of them. First tonight, our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, reports on Mrs May's offer.
5 o'clock. Hardly a Tory MP to be seen on the green benches, waiting for their leader, not knowing if she was ready to say she'd leave the black door for a final time. Hundreds of her MPs crammed into a room upstairs.
It was hot and steamy in there. There was quite a lot of emotion.
There was no whooping and hollering, and no one takes any great pleasure in what's happened.
She made a really sad, but highly charged, emotional speech.
So packed, cabinet ministers couldn't even get inside.
I just managed to squeeze into a very crowded committee room and get in and saw her make an announcement. It was actually a very moving statement, and she was, very clearly making the case that, look, if this is what it takes to get the deal over the line, which she believes, rightly in my view, that is in the national interest, then I will go once Brexit is done.
It's a sacrifice Number 10 hopes that has a purpose: to reverse the fierce Brexiteer opposition to the compromise Theresa May worked out with the European Union, so they can have another vote, another try to get it through in the next 48 hours.
We can guarantee delivering on Brexit if this week he and others in this House support the deal.
The Prime Minister is failing to deliver Brexit because she can't build a consensus, is unable to compromise and unable to reunite the country. She is unable to resolve the central issues facing Britain today, and she is frankly unable to govern.
Forget Prime Minister's questions, though.
Patience is amazing.
The question tonight is how many Tory opponents of the deal can Theresa May's promise shift?
You wish you'd changed your mind sooner, Mr. Eastmark? No?
Some big-name Brexiteers were already on the move.
I preferred leaving without a deal, but once that had gone, as I say, I was willing to back Mrs May's deal, and she has now said that once the deal has gone through, if it does go through, then she will stand down, which I think shows her inner nobility.
I am very worried that we might lose Brexit. I have campaigned for Brexit, and I think the alternatives are looking increasingly unattractive. I am encouraged that she has accepted that we should have a new leader for that second stage when it comes. So yes, I think I will now vote for the agreement.
But there's a hard core, enough perhaps to block her still.
She is not. I think we universally agree the best Prime Minister we've had and not the right person for stage 2. The reason I'm not happy is that the deal, even part 1, which she's absolutely adamant that gets signed before she goes, takes us back into Europe, not out of Europe.
What price for DUP support?
And it's almost impossible to imagine this deal getting over the line without the Prime Minister's allies she invited into Number 10 back in the summer of 2017. The Northern Irish Unionists are meant to keep the government afloat. Not budging, not this time.
The backstop in that withdrawal agreement makes it impossible for us to sign up to the withdrawal agreement. And you know what? I regret that, because we wanted to get a deal that worked for the whole of the United Kingdom, a deal that worked for Northern Ireland. But now we're in a situation where we cannot sign up to the withdrawal agreement, and it's all because the Prime Minister decided to go for that backstop.
The Prime Minister told her MPs tonight, just up there, she's ready to pay the highest price, to give up office early in a grand bargain for support to pass her Brexit deal. But without support from her Northern Irish allies, it may prove to be another failure. The dilemma may be answered not by Theresa May, but by Parliament itself. Parliament's warming up to make the decisions, tonight voting itself on an alphabet of different versions of Brexit, whether for a closer relationship with the EU than the Prime Minister plans, or even to leave without a deal. But even having said she'd quit, the Prime Minister walked in to hear no to option after option.
So the noes have it.
No majority for anything at all. Whether it is, in the end, the Prime Minister's deal or a variation cooked up by MPs, Brexit has steeped bitterness in yet another generation of Conservative MPs.
I think it's very strange for people who have the most heartfelt objections to this deal on all areas of principle, but someone says they'll fall on their sword and, oh, that's okay then.
Do you think it might be about the future leadership of your party?
Imagine.
Well, I tell you what, it might be for some of them, but those people who've played the games they've been playing won't be getting my support, and I'll be doing everything I can to make sure that those who have put their leadership ambitions ahead of the interests of the country are the people who do least well when any ballot comes.
The Prime Minister may hope our bargain could bring new order, but we can't know that yet. What's certain is Theresa May has become another Tory leader whose time in office was pulled apart by anguish over Europe.
Well, lots of significant developments to talk about today. We'll talk to our Europe editor, Katja Adler, in Brussels in a moment. But first, let's have more from Laura, who's with me at Westminster. Let's talk about the Prime Minister's gesture, offer, whatever you want to call it. Is that going to do the trick in terms of her deal?
Not as things stand, Hugh, particularly because the DUP, her Northern Irish allies, who she signed up with all those months ago in the wake of the general election, are not yet ready to come on board. They've been crystal clear about that. Now, never say never. It's not impossible that in the next 48 hours or in the coming weeks or even in the coming months, in the end, they might come round to a version of Theresa May's deal. But as things stand, it seems that this big gesture, the biggest weapon in any Prime Minister's armoury, seems to have fired a dud. That said, things have been so fluid here tonight, so fluid today, and so fluid really for a number of days. I wouldn't rule out anything happening that we at the moment can't predict. And in the last half hour, Parliament has showed itself still unable to agree on any better option. It's not surprising that there wasn't a majority for anything tonight, but the message that might send to some of people who are thinking about backing the Prime Minister but are reluctant to do so is, well, perhaps that might be the only thing that they would be able to get on board with. But, you know, if I were number 10 and I've been thinking this could be a genius last roll of the dice, so far it's a gamble that is not certain to pay off at all.
We'll talk about the parliamentary votes just in a short while, Laura. Thanks very much. I want to go to Brussels and bring in Katja. Katja, what's the perspective there in Brussels on not just on Mrs May's gesture or offer, but also on the parliamentary votes that have just been announced in the past hour or so?
Well, look, Hugh, I think like in the UK, the EU finds itself in a kind of agonising holding pattern now, waiting for something definitive to happen in Westminster. All of this waiting, the uncertainty affecting European businesses and European citizens. The EU finds all of this really frustrating. And what I found was there was a real contrast in moods tonight between the EU and the UK. You know, in Westminster, there was a certain buzz, a dynamism, MPs trying to do their bit to affect the direction of Brexit, whereas here in Brussels, throughout the evening, the mood has been really dark. EU leaders still look at the divisions in Parliament and in government, and they fear the creeping inevitability of a no-deal Brexit. Now, of course, they'd be thrilled if that wasn't the case, but it would also be wrong to listen to the European Council President Donald Tusk earlier today. He spoke in support of those in the UK who want to cancel Brexit or to have another vote, and to say that EU leaders still really are hoping for the UK to change its mind. The fact is that it's nearly been 3 years now since the EU referendum. The EU has got used to the idea of Brexit. EU leaders are convinced that Brexit is going to be very damaging for the UK, at least in the short to medium term. So their focus now is not on the UK, it's on stopping that presumed damage from spreading. The word often used here is infecting the rest of the European Union.
Katja, many thanks again. Katja Adler there for us in Brussels, and we'll be joined again by Laura in a short while. Well, as Laura was saying, Mrs May clearly hoping that her promise to leave office before the next stage of the Brexit negotiations will be enough to tempt a sufficient number of MPs to back her withdrawal agreement. But what is the detail of that plan, which has already been decisively rejected by MPs on 2 occasions, and how certain is it indeed that she will get that necessary support? This report from our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, does contain some flashing images.
Hacking down leaders over Europe has become a habit for the Conservatives, but that's no consolation to Theresa May. Her remaining wish to be the PM who delivers Brexit, and there's no guarantee of even that.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
Twice now, Mrs May's deal has been defeated, and by crushing margins. Could she succeed at the 3rd time of asking? Not easy. Not even she claims to be an enthusiast for what became the product of many compromises. For Mrs May, it's still a hard sell. She claims ending free movement eventually as a big gain and the prospect of future trade deals. But Britain's divorce settlement is sitting at £39 billion, though with no guarantees on the detail of the future relationship. There'd be a Brexit transition till the end of 2020 and longer if both sides agree. But if no trade deals in place in time, Britain would stay within EU customs rules and Northern Ireland closer still to avoid stop stops and checks on the Irish border. Brexiteers still hate the plan, fear being trapped under EU rules indefinitely, claim that's what Brussels really wants. Big-name Brexiteers Mrs May hosted at Chequers at the weekend came aboard tonight for fear of losing Brexit altogether. Boris Johnson, whose leadership ambitions are no secret, and Brexiteer standard-bearer Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's saying if the Democratic Unionists soften their position, he will too. Others may follow.
With the Prime Minister saying what she said, the majority in that room see this now as the best way to get us out and to be able to deal with it in the future. People broadly not happy with the corner that we've been backed into.
But enough. The DUP so far seem to be holding firm. The government needs to win over some Labour MPs, and they haven't persuaded many, nor enough Tory Brexiteers. And there's another potential obstacle. The Speaker, John Bercow, won't even let Mrs May make a third attempt to win a vote if he's not satisfied something new's on offer.
In order that there should be no misunderstanding, I wish to make clear that I do expect the government to meet the test of change.
Mrs May's been on borrowed time for months. Tonight she promised to settle up and go, to allow someone else to try to shape Britain's post-Brexit future, if only she can deliver Brexit, hand on a political legacy. She may have to leave without even that. John Pienaar, BBC News.
Well, we talked earlier about the crucial importance to Theresa May of her parliamentary partners, the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland. Let's talk to our correspondent Emma Vardy, who's in Belfast. And still no secret at all, really, Emma, about the main factor, which is for the DUP, the reason for their objection.
Well, look, the DUP, of course, are very well known here in Northern Ireland for holding a very tough line in negotiations. So no surprise here, at least, that they're continuing to do that when it comes to Theresa May's deal on the big stage. Now, her promise to go doesn't change the landscape here from the DUP's perspective, because their immediate problem remains the fear that the Irish backstop could leave Northern Ireland stuck in a situation where it's treated differently from its main market, the rest of the UK. It is all about the union for the DUP. Now, tonight the party has said that it will not back Theresa May's deal in its current form if it is brought back for a third time. But don't forget, of course, apart from DUP supporters, there are still many voters here, many businesses who do wish that they would get on board with it. Now, the party has left the door open to being brought on side, no matter how difficult that may seem. But even at this late stage, the party still doesn't want to be seen to be backing the deal at the last moment, playing its hand too soon if it's going to fail anyway.
Emma, many thanks. Emma Vardy there in Belfast. From Belfast to Edinburgh, let's talk to our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, on the Scottish Parliament making its view very clear today, Sarah.
Yes, the Holyrood Parliament voted overwhelmingly to cancel Brexit today by a two-thirds majority. Now, that's not a vote that has any legal force, but it is important because it shows you where the argument is going in Scotland, what the politics of Brexit are here. It allows the SNP to build their argument that Westminster is ignoring the voice of the Scottish Parliament and of the Scottish electorate, who, remember, voted 62% in favour of remaining in the European Union, and they hope that that argument will garner support for Scottish independence. Tonight, Nicola Sturgeon said that the chaos in Westminster just reinforces the case for Scotland taking its future into its own hands. So the SNP aren't being entirely cynical about this. I mean, they genuinely do believe that Brexit would be very damaging for Scotland, but they also do want another referendum on Scottish independence eventually. And as we move towards them announcing their plans for that, expect to hear these arguments about Scotland's voice being ignored in Westminster get louder and louder, because they hope that that's one way that they can persuade more people Scotland should be independent.
Sarah, thanks again. Sarah Smith, with the latest there for us at the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh. So, with the current voting process in the House of Commons on that new Brexit approach, if they can find it, what are the likely timings? There's now the possibility that the Prime Minister could try to hold a third vote on her controversial deal, probably by this Friday. That's the plan anyway. If she fails, Parliament could come back on Monday to debate other options, though tonight, let's just say this again, no single option drew majority support in the House of Commons. And if the Prime Minister can't get the deal through, the UK will have to propose a way forward by the 12th of April for EU leaders to consider. If the deal does get support, Britain would then leave the European Union on May the 22nd. And that then could lead, after Mrs May's statement today, to a Conservative leadership contest, probably in late May, with the possibility of the UK having a new Prime Minister by the early summer. So with all of that to think about, Laura's with me once again. Let's deal with the votes tonight, Laura. Were you expecting any of these options to get majority support at this point?
No, because what we've seen is in the last few weeks, different rival tribes of MPs try to build alliances, try to build collaboration, often cross parties, to try to come up with an idea. But they've really almost been at first base. They've been at the stage of saying, OK, what might plan B essentially be if the Prime Minister's deal failed? So it's not surprising that they couldn't come to any really strong conclusion, and it's not surprising that anything got a majority, but it's not meaningless. And there are two particular plans that did almost make it, or weren't a million miles off. One for a customs union, which had some government ministers voting for it, a closer trading relationship with the European Union than the Prime Minister has been arguing for, and she's always ruled that out. But also the idea of another referendum, whatever happens. So one of the plans put forward was to say, whatever this place decides in the end, whatever number 10 puts forward in the end, you and me and all of our viewers should have another say. That didn't make it over the line, but like the customs union option, it wasn't far off. Both of those plans, though, are politically, maybe not impossible, but extremely tricky for this government to put through, because it's a complete contradiction from what was in their party manifesto.
And given what's happened today, given Mrs May's statement to MPs, how likely is it, do you think, that by the summer there'll be a new Prime Minister, a new Conservative leader?
I think it's quite likely. I mean, Theresa May said she'll go if MPs back her deal. The question of what happens if they don't, well, there's a sketchier answer from that on number 10. If we end up with a longer delay with the European Union, if we end up with some kind of convoluted process that's led by Parliament, nothing is impossible. It is, of course, quite likely, even if her plan goes pop, she'll try to stay on. But for any Prime Minister to say to their party, to more than 300 MPs in a hot, cramped room in there, I'll quit, you can't take that back.
Laura, thanks very much again. Laura Ginsburg there, our political editor with the latest thinking here at Westminster.
Good evening from Westminster on another day of more or less continuous drama. This afternoon, the Prime Minister announced she would step down if her deal were passed. Almost immediately, Boris Johnson and a raft of other Tories indicated they would now support her deal. But even that may not be enough. Mrs May's parliamentary allies, Northern Ireland's DUP, said they could not support her. What's more, the deputy chairman of the Tory Eurosceptic ERG apparently told a meeting of that group in the Commons that he was consumed by a ferocious rage and could tear this place down and bulldoze it into the river. If you are wondering what on earth has become of us, you are surely not alone. Not least because their MPs who've spent the day debating a whole raft of alternatives to Mrs May's deal have, in the past few minutes, decided they don't like any of them. All 8 were voted down. MPs will try again on Monday.
She's held on for so much longer than anyone expected. But today, the Prime Minister headed to the Commons, knowing she'd have to reach for her final roll of the dice, promising MPs she will step down once Brexit is delivered if they now back her deal. I'm prepared to leave this job earlier than I intended, she told them, in order to do what is right for our country and our party. I ask everyone in this room to back the deal so we can complete our historic duty. Even some of her strongest critics believe it should help her deal over the line.
She behaved incredibly well and properly, and I think people admire her for that.
Do you think it will be enough to save the deal?
It depends on the DUP. That I think if the DUP is at least neutral, then there is a very good chance the deal will go through.
But the DUP are saying tonight they are not on board.
We feel very fundamentally that the backstop in that withdrawal agreement makes it impossible for us to sign up to the withdrawal agreement. And you know what? I regret that, because we wanted to get a deal that worked for the whole of the United Kingdom, a deal that worked for Northern Ireland. But now we're in a situation where we cannot sign up to the withdrawal agreement, and it's all because the Prime Minister decided to go for that backstop.
That makes this result of the indicative vote process tonight all the more closely watched.
I can now announce the result of today's recorded votes on motions relating to the United Kingdom's withdrawal from and future relationship with the European Union.
In historic scenes this evening, MPs took control of the parliamentary agenda, voting on a series of options, with none getting a clear majority, but the one advocating that any deal agreed be put to a second referendum, receiving the most votes.
It is, of course, a very great disappointment that the House has not chosen to find a majority for any proposition. However, those of us who put this proposal forward as a way of proceeding predicted that we would not this evening reach a majority, and indeed for that very reason put forward a business of the House motion designed to allow the House to reconsider these matters on Monday.
Earlier at Prime Minister's questions, Jeremy Corbyn had made hay with Mrs May's difficulties.
She is unable to resolve the central issues facing Britain today, and she is frankly unable to govern. The Prime Minister faces, Mr Speaker, a very clear choice. The one endorsed by the country and many of her own party: either listen and change course or go. Which is it to be?
The Prime Minister has now made her choice, and she also indicated she wants to bring her Brexit deal back this week.
We can guarantee delivering on Brexit if this week he and others in this House support the deal.
Not so fast, said the Speaker, reiterating his ruling that the same deal can't be voted on again.
I understand that the government may be thinking of bringing meaningful vote 3 before the House either tomorrow or even on Friday, if the House opts to sit that day. Therefore, in order that there should be no misunderstanding, I wish to make clear that I do expect the government to meet the test of change.
So the Prime Minister tonight is still facing pretty daunting hurdles. She's played her last card, offering herself as the sacrifice, but it's by no means certain it will be enough. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
OK, well, as Romilly mentioned there, tonight MPs voted on a number of alternatives to the government's Brexit plans, though failed to find a majority for any of them. Let's just run through them for a moment. On leaving the EU without a deal, 160 voted for, 400 against. On what is known as Common Market 2.0, there were 188 MPs in favour, 283 against. Staying in the European Free Trade Area and the EEA, the European Economic Area, received support from 65 MPs, while 377 were against. A motion supporting a customs union was the closest, with 264 MPs in favour and just 8 more against. Labour's alternative plan was also rejected by 237 to 307. Revoking Article 50 to avoid no deal and stay in the EU received support from 184 MPs, while 293 rejected it, while the most support was for a public vote on any deal, another referendum. 268 for and 295 against. The final motion of what many see as a managed no deal was rejected by a margin of 139 to 422. Possibly at this point you're losing the will to carry on. I'm sure you're not alone. With me are Labour MP Jess Phillips, Dominic Grieve from the Tories, of course, was famously in favour of Remain, and Anne-Marie Morris, who's in the ERG and hasn't changed her mind on the deal. Anne-Marie, can I start with you? Is Theresa May's deal finished at this point, do you think?
Yes, I do. And the reason I say that is less than until she can be sure she gets into the actually numbers out there. And the more I talk to the DUP, I had a conversation with Nigel today, my sense is that this has become an issue not just about the union, but also about the deal itself and the, if you like, the economic disadvantages of it for the whole of the UK, clearly including Ireland.
She has literally thrown everything, including her own job, at it. And do you make 20 to 30 ERGs still against, plus the DUP? No chance of any of those numbers coming down, do you think?
No. In fact, I think they're harder than that. No, I don't think they're going to be coming down.
And do you think she will accept it's now finished for her deal? It's over?
I think the answer is yes, but in that she's now got to find a way of managing her exit, because the reality is her credibility is now completely shot. So she's got to find a way out. Not putting it doesn't put closure. So frankly, I'd say it's 50-50 as to whether she actually does put it on Friday, and at some point, not too far away, she's going to have to make that decision. Otherwise, it's next week. But there comes a point when she either does it or she resigns, and to be honest, she's got to resign.
Always supposing the Speaker allows her to put it back, which he said he wouldn't today. Jess and Dominic, Jess, maybe I'll start with you. The public is going to be watching this in intense frustration. I mean, we're in the some position tonight where there's no majority for anything. What happens next?
I mean, I think that we have an opportunity on Monday for some of those motions to go back. I would suggest, although I didn't tell the Speaker what to do, that the most popular cross-party support ones went back, because the idea of having a second referendum on whatever deal plus Remain got the highest number of votes, and also it beat what Theresa May's deal has ever got. So, and we have to keep being asked about that.
It's competition with a very low bar. All of this, I have to say.
I recognise it's a low bar, and the public will be frustrated. The whole thing is horrendously frustrating, and if it makes anyone feel better, we're all completely at the end.
Dominic, what do you think happens next?
I think it's to misunderstand the purpose of today's voting, to think that a majority was going to emerge for something. We've known for a long time that there's very hard to get a majority. What Oliver Letwin, and indeed myself, because I backed him, was trying to do through this process was to start breaking the logjam, to start identifying where a majority might lie, and to start a debate going which might lead to a majority being found that the government would be willing to endorse and adopt and to solve the problem of the current crisis. Now, I agree with Anne-Marie. I find it hard to see how the Prime Minister is going to get her deal through the House of Commons. I simply don't think the arithmetic's there. It's been rejected for sound reasons, but we are beginning to see at least two patterns emerge. One was the extent to which possibly a customs union might be of interest. The other one, which was by far the clearest and unusually clear in view of the deep-rooted hostility in some parts of the House to it, was the question of having a referendum to resolve this issue. And I actually derived great comfort from that. And I would be urging my colleagues to reflect on this over the weekend, because I believe it provides the potential solution. But we've got much more work to do.
Okay. That's the understatement. We must move on, but thank you very much for joining us indeed, ending with a great understatement there. Now, whatever MPs decide, either tonight, next week or sometime into the future, nothing changes without the agreement of the European Union, of course. Our Europe editor, James, is in Strasbourg tonight. James, what do you think they will make of today's rather extraordinary events here?
I think you're seeing an entire continent throwing their hands up in the air in complete confusion and some degree of contempt as well, that a British Parliament that was given a precisely 2-year negotiating period, and it took 1 year and 363 days before they could get together and decide what they wanted, and then failed to decide on anything. I think the only consolation they will take is, as one of your guests was saying there, that the two closest options were the customs union, which they remind people requires the withdrawal agreement being passed, and the second referendum option, which doesn't. I mean, patience is wearing very thin, though we did see in the European Parliament this morning from Donald Tusk, the Council President, an appeal to MEPs, and he'll be making the same appeal to national leaders as well, to stick with the British people on here, because I think there is a growing feeling that the mood may be changing in the UK. They have been impressed by the size of the march at the weekend and by the numbers signing their petition. So there will be appeals for patience, but that is coming up against real anger at the irresponsibility that this is doing to Europe, and that no deal would do, given that it would hurt the whole of Europe.
Okay, James, thank you very much indeed. Well, back here in the ancient town of Battle near Hastings, they know a thing or two, of course, about how Europe can affect what happens on this side of the Channel. The townspeople opted to leave back in 2016. Today, we've been asking some of them for their thoughts now on the progress or lack of it in Brexit.
It was here in 1066 that two armies clashed over the sovereignty of England. The Norman conquest shaped the language, laws and customs we know today, and bound Britain with France and Europe. In the town named after that famous battle against foreign rule, almost 60% of people voted to leave the EU. And at the local garden centre, the battle of Brexit is now being waged with less bloodshed, but no less passion. While Pam wants MPs to get on with Brexit, her friend Moira wants another referendum.
Some would say we already had a people's vote, we already had a referendum, and we should respect the democratic process and respect the outcome of that.
But there's a lot of young people that didn't have that vote that could now have it 2 years ago, i.e. one of my grandchildren would be able to vote now. So I think they should give it back to the people to vote.
Almost 6 million people signed a petition saying we should revoke Article 50. Shouldn't we just call the whole thing off, pretend it never happened?
No, because I don't think that would... I mean, what would that make our country look like if we did that and went back on what 17 million people voted for?
Francesca was one of those 17 million.
So do you think we should just go ahead, leave, even if it means leaving without a deal?
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, business is business, profits are profits. You really think BMW and Mercedes are not going to want to deal with us?
The big issue in the UK is it does seem to be quite difficult to get people with the necessary skills.
At this vineyard, they rely on seasonal workers, often from Europe.
The issue is with not knowing whether it's going to be one thing or the other.
So what's your message to all those politicians in the House of Commons right now?
The polite version would be get on with it.
Meanwhile, at Battle Baptist Football Club, they're not convinced by Theresa May's promise to stand down if her deal is passed.
Quite simply put, it's just going to end up with somebody that's a bit more committed to a hard Brexit, I think, taking over, and we know how calamitous that would be for the country.
After the Battle of Hastings, this abbey was built to atone for the carnage. What might follow the Battle of Brexit? Rebecca Barry, News at 10, Battle.
OK, some of the views of the people in battle. But back here in Westminster, the government says, despite everything that's happened today, it remains determined to win over MPs to the Prime Minister's deal. Yes, you did hear that right. Last time around, you may remember the withdrawal agreement was rejected by a majority of 149, with just 242 MPs backing it, well short of the 318 they need for a majority. With the Prime Minister's announcement that she will go if her deal is agreed, she may have won over around 50 of the Tory rebels. More are said to be thinking about it tonight. But there is still a sizable number holding out, as you heard Anne-Marie say earlier. So are Northern Ireland's DUP, who say they can't support the deal. And if she's unable to change their minds, change the minds of those or more Conservatives, she'd be around 26 votes short. Convincing enough Labour MPs to close that gap would be, of course, a huge task. OK, well, let's go and talk to Robert now to work out what on earth all this means. Robert, essentially at this point, do you think the Prime Minister's deal is finally finished?
Well, at the end of the day, she's got to make that decision. I struggle to see, Tom, how she gets it across the line with the DUP saying that categorically they are not going to vote for it, they're going to vote against it. Now, you'll remember that the influential Tory Brexiter Jacob Rees-Mogg made his vote for her deal conditional on whether the DUP would back it. He's actually coming on my show in a few minutes, and I'm going to ask him whether actually, now that the DUP have said they're against it, he's against it. But, you know, straightforwardly, she doesn't have the numbers. She's got a very big decision to make, whether to somehow keep this thing going or to recognise that if she does pursue what looks like a lost cause, we are facing chaos on Brexit Day, April the 12th.
OK, well, if that's the case when it comes to her deal, I mean, many people will view what's happened here this evening in total frustration. Do you see a way forward? I mean, what do you make of no option floating to the top of the pile?
So, under this incredible historic initiative by MPs to take back control of Parliament's business, there will be another attempt on Monday to see if a single proposition can get a majority. As you pointed out, the two most popular propositions in today's votes were a referendum. That got the most votes. Second most was Ken Clarke's idea that we should stay in a customs union. Very important that both of those got more votes than the Prime Minister's deal. Now, here's a novel idea for the Prime Minister. What she could do is she could ask backbench MPs whether her proposal could be included in the runoff on Monday. That at least would show how it ranks alongside the other options. But, you know, the honest truth, Tom, tonight is that this is I called it a dog's breakfast. Maybe it's a dog's Brexit, but it is a, it's a desperate mess. And add to that mess this, that the Prime Minister today did something that no Prime Minister in modern times has done, which is because she's unpopular, she offered to quit in order to persuade people to get her to vote for her deal, and that has failed. She is now utterly, fatally wounded as a Prime Minister, and it's not a question of if she goes, it's when she goes.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Finally, from Westminster tonight, if we had hoped today would bring clarity and direction as MPs got a chance to call the tune on Brexit, well, it hasn't quite turned out like that. It's no surprise they're playing doleful music around here, and you cannot escape the feeling that we do live in extraordinary times. The certainties of our national life under pressure like never before. The future of the Prime Minister is in doubt, the direction that Brexit is to take from here undecided, the attitude of our European partners unclear. We have heard many times what Parliament does not want. Today, we are no nearer to knowing what it does. Almost 3 years since we voted to leave, the end of the Brexit story has yet to be written. Good night.